Welcome to another episode of the Kashmir Notebook with Gowhar Geelani, a special frontline broadcast. We have with us a young filmmaker, an author who wrote this debut book, Loal Kashmir, which consists of 16 love stories from Kashmir. And we have the pleasure of speaking to Mehak Jamal. Welcome to the show, Mehak.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So, Mehak, these stories, 16 stories, are set mostly in Kashmir, and the backdrop is the communication blockade of 2019. And what happens to these human interest stories? What happens to people's emotions? What happens to people when there is no way to communicate with each other? There are no phones, there are no mobile phones, there are no landlines, fixed lines, there's nothing. But you talk about in some of the stories, there is this power of letters. So first, my question would be for our audiences to understand, how did the book come up, would be, how was the gathering process? How did you gather these stories, 16 stories? And did you drop any stories? Did you have more stories which you could not tell?
Well, thank you for your question. And yes, so the book, as you said, contains 16 stories. And yes, there were many stories which I collected during the course of interviewing people. I started this project as a memory project in 2020. So it's 1 year after the abrogation and the communication blockade. And I decided, and I kept hearing these stories, stories of love from people during that blockade, in particular when people were finding ingenious ways to reach out to each other, to communicate with each other, because the regular means of doing so weren't there anymore. So once I started thinking of it, I realized that there might be tons of these stories from Kashmir, and especially because the Kashmir conflict is an enduring one. So I got interested in looking at love and longing in Kashmir through different periods of unrest, and that's what started Lul Kashmir. And I started interviewing people. The main way of collecting these stories was an online project call where I put out exactly what I was looking for with a simple Google form which people could fill, and I would get their response, and then I would reach out to them and I would get their basic information from the Google form, but I would interview them over a phone call or Zoom or in person, essentially. So that was one way. The other way was, the simplest one, through word of mouth. I kept hearing about some stories, so I would reach out to people I knew in Kashmir, to journalists, anybody who had heard of such stories. And that's how Loal Kashmir came to be. And so over the course of, so that's ending 2020, and the book came out in January 2025.
This year.
So it's been a whole 4-year journey from inception to it coming out. There are a few stories which I collected later on, closer to release as well, where I saw the gaps in the narratives, and I specifically went to look for those ones. And yes, by the end of it, I did have to drop a few stories. Specifically, I would say because sometimes because they were repetitive, especially if you talk about the last part of the book, which is around 2019.
You also divide the book in 3 sections.
Yeah.
One is, it's a Kashmiri word, Raat, Az, and Otr, like a day before yesterday, today, and
Yeah.
so like that. One of my curiosities was that there is a story of one woman who is from the other side of Kashmir.
Yeah.
So it's like we had East Berlin and West Berlin, divided families.
Yeah.
So the divided family is from both sides of Kashmir on the line of control. So this Bushra gets married to a Kashmiri boy who had crossed to the other side in the early 90s. And then they get married, and then they first take it from in writing from the boy that he would not go back to Kashmir.
Yeah.
And then once they come here, and he apparently throws their passports, passport of Bushra in Nepal, somewhere in Nepal. And then this woman is like, she has no citizenship. She doesn't know whether she will get a chance to go back to her homeland. So there is this longing. First, there is love, that she falls in love with her husband. And then there are kids. But what happens to these women? And there are other stories like that as well. So then you bring also other stories where especially which struck me, was about the two doctors, one who worked in psychiatry department, and so this you name them Gowhar, and there's this Ikra, I think. And some names I think are changed and they're not real names for obvious reasons. But these are the real ones. So tell me, I mean, these are very interesting stories in a way that the conflict is happening. There's the larger Kashmir conflict, and then there is communications blockade. You have no way to reach to other people, and then people, start going back to writing letters and finding ways and means to reach out to each other. How did this happen? And did you have a chance to go back to these people to find out what happens? Because there are some stories where there is closure, but there are some stories which are left like, we don't know what happened to them.
So, like you mentioned, letter writing. So, what's very intriguing about it is, so the first chapter of the book is called Love Letter, right? And as you said, the book is divided into three halves: Uttar, Raat, and Az, which means day before yesterday, yesterday, and today. So, in the first chapter, which is in the early 90s, this boy is writing, he and his girlfriend, they use letter writing as a way of communicating with each other. And many, many years later, now 30 years later, when the abrogation happened and there's no form of communication, there's no internet, there's no phone, landline. It's like landline was, of course, dwindling and coming back. There were no phone services or anything. And there were also physical blockades everywhere in Kashmir, stopping people from even making a very short commute, especially in the earlier days after the abrogation. So people were kind of forced to resort back to letter writing in a way, and become very experimental and inventive
and find joy in this old communication tool.
Enjoy in this old communication tool. So in a way, it is poetic and ironic, but it's also very heartbreaking to think that that a group of people are reduced to that when their whole world is at the highest speed of internet and you can just reach out to anybody in a second. And in Kashmir, just 5-6 years ago, it was impossible to even talk to somebody who maybe lives 1 kilometer away from you. And so I felt there's something very poignant about these stories, and they should be documented, because when you generally talk about Kashmir and the conflict, I think the lived experiences of the conflict are as important to talk about, to document, because, in the times that we live in, when history can be altered, sometimes memory is a much more powerful tool, because collective public memory means that 10 different people, if they say this happened to me, so then you kind of start making that thing undeniable when you collect memory.
Yeah, it is irrefutable in a way.
Yeah, it is irrefutable. So I think one of the reasons to start this project and write this book was also that, to collect
and preserve memories,
and preserve them, and preserve
and fight erasure.
Yeah, and stories of love, which I, in a way, it's something that maybe the last thing you think of when you think of Kashmir, but also maybe it's the first thing you think of when you think about Kashmir, and that is the gravity and dichotomy of this place.
I am reminded of Khushwant Singh. He once said, and he once remarked that अगर आप इश्क करना चाहते हैं तो उर्दू सीख लीजिए, अगर आप उर्दू सीखना चाहते हैं तो इश्क कर लीजिए. That if you want to fall in love, learn Urdu, and if you want to learn Urdu, fall in love. So then this first story that you have written about this boy Javed, who is who wants to show off a love letter that he has received from his girlfriend, and it's written in Urdu, and both are writing to each other in Urdu. And he doesn't know that suddenly there is this crackdown where early 90s, and people are taken out, men especially are taken out, and taken to a playground. Sometimes it would last for 3 days. And then he's very curious about his letter, what will happen to the letter. And suddenly the soldiers, get hold of his letter, and, sort of in a twist, there is that they actually get interested in that letter. Tell us more about this story. And
so I think that story is the perfect entry into the world of Loal Kashmir, because, of course, it's called love and longing in a torn land, but not all the stories are of romantic love. Some are platonic love, some are familial love, and And like
some are heartbreaks.
Heartbreaks, and some, like you mentioned, Bushra. I think Bushra's story, more than her love story, it's really about her love for her homeland.
Yes.
And being stuck in another place and wanting to go over there. So in a similar way, I felt this story of Javed, love letter. It kind of perfectly encapsulates the dichotomies that Kashmir exists in, because and it's about himself through the course of that afternoon when that crackdown is going on, where he is questioning his own beliefs. Because here is this love letter which these soldiers have found,
and they're like probably of the same age as him, and they are perhaps also reminded of their own stories back home.
And also it's written in Urdu, so they don't understand it.
They
So
want him
think,
to narrate the entire
so
story.
he's afraid that they think it's a militant code,
Yes.
and they're going to take him away. And because nobody attributes crackdowns with a pleasant memory.
Yes.
It is very jarring and it is very traumatic for most of the people who are a part of it, mostly men, because men are the ones who are taken away. And so he doesn't really know what to do except they say recite your love letter, and he doesn't know what else to do but to do this, to recite it. And that's the only short way that he sees to get out of the situation. And because he doesn't want to go to the next level, the identification parade with the Mukhbir, he wants to stay here. So he decides I'm going to just stretch this out as long as I want it to go. Whereas maybe he's not very cognizant of the fact that this is also, it can be seen as humiliation, what he needs to do. But I think he focuses on the part of wanting to get out of the situation. And those soldiers are lapping it up and, really eating out of the palm of his hands. And by the end of it, they're almost like buddies. And he realizes
but then he's also seen with suspicion.
Yeah, and he doesn't like that. He doesn't want to be seen as their buddies or be seen as complicit with them, because that's a whole different,
But just for our audiences, especially in South India, Loal is a Kashmiri word which can be love or longing and affection, for example. It's also, there's also another word equivalent of it, which is mai, for example, or in Urdu we call it ishq or muhabbat in Farsi. So tell me, Mirza Wahid, Kashmir's one of Kashmir's greatest novelists. He talks about your book and he endorses it by saying that it's one of the poignant love letter to all ashiks.
Heartbroken and
all heartbroken
and
hopeful ashiks, lovers of Kashmir. So Farah Bashir is also written in praise, or so has Sanjay Kak. But there is also like one thing which struck me was the use of Kashmiri words in your stories. That in every story there are Kashmiri words. Was it for when was it a deliberate attempt on your part to keep something of Kashmir in your book in terms of these words, introducing other audiences to Kashmiri words, or was it just meant as a linguistic decoration or linguistic dressing?
Certainly not the latter. I think I wanted to bring about more layers to the text as much as possible. And if you see the words which are used throughout the book, they're also not italicized or any way. So I was trying to kind of inculcate them into the prose itself. So, for a Kashmiri reading it, it's a happy surprise. And for somebody who is not from
non-Kashmiri,
they learn something new about the place.
Get curious about these words.
And a lot of times the dialogues are in Kashmiri, and most of the time those are they're how they were told to me by the contributor. So I didn't
maintain originality
as well. And sometimes where I just felt like something like Chilai Kalan. How do I say that in
40-day long period of extreme cold?
In another way. So I think having all of those words, and also just objects and things which are a part of Kashmir which you don't really see anywhere else or know about, like what is a kandur or what is a kangar. So all of these things.
I have to also explain these words. Kandur is a baker and kangri is a fire pot which we use in winter
to
warm
yourself. You keep yourself warm. So I felt they were very much needed, and I think they came very organically to the text.
Okay.
And for anybody who doesn't understand it, there's a huge glossary
Yeah,
at the end of the book as well, explaining everything in detail. So a lot of times, I have tried to explain it while I've written it in the prose, what it means, but most of the time I've just let it be. So, I mean, that's,
So now
yeah.
one question I wanted to ask was about yourself, because you also have a very interesting background.
Yeah.
Your father is married to a woman from Maharashtra.
Yeah.
She's from, your mother is a Maharashtrian. And you were yourself brought up in Srinagar.
Yeah.
And I think your grandmother was also from UP?
Yeah, my paternal.
Paternal, yes.
Yeah.
So tell us about your own experiences in these stories, which you have actually gathered. Was there something, because of your multicultural upbringing, that you studied in Bangalore, you went for your work, you are in Bombay, and you lived in Srinagar, you studied here.
Yeah.
So you must have seen other love stories developing across these places where you have lived.
Yeah.
So was there something that you wanted to tell, that these love stories happen in any setting? Was there something in your mind, given your experiences of living and studying, in two different regions?
So I was born and brought up over here. I did all my schooling here, and I went through all those, the summers of unrest from 2008, 9, 10. So when I was growing up, I kept thinking to myself, when we were all, because I wasn't allowed to go out at that point of time, and I felt, um, does the world really know what's happening within all of us in Kashmir? Because everybody reads the news and they see what's happening on the news, and that's all they know of Kashmir. But there's a different side to our lives, and we are, like, at that time I was a teenager, and I would really wanted to be out and about and be with my friends. And I realized there's always this struggle, as Kashmiris, to want to live a normal life, but also want to really let the world know what's happening here.
Their aspirations.
Yeah, and also letting people know about all the the violations which have happened here over the years.
So sorry to interrupt here. That's this part of the book where, like, some readers would get this impression that these are all love stories, but you also bring Kashmir in it. Like,
Yeah.
there is also conflict, there is
Yeah.
also violence, there is also other things happening simultaneously, which are also impacting these love stories in different ways. For example, there is this story about Visa, which you call Visa. So there is this Kashmiri girl who's already in America, and then they there is this rishta. They get sort of and something happens to her mother. She's suffering from cancer, probably. And then, because of other circumstances, geopolitics,
Get her
visa. There's
for
a delay in
after
visa. Then she
that.
teaches at a convent school. Just struggles, her struggles. But it also sort of exposes one or another story. For example, a Kashmiri in Gaza. So both actually have a kind of a background where they sort of relate to each other in different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me more about these stories.
About stories in which somebody is in a relationship with somebody not from Kashmir.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I wanted the stories to also be as diverse as possible, because love exists in different ways, and it's not like, and like you mentioned, my own
Upbringing,
upbringing and my background, because my mother's Maharashtrian and my father's Kashmiri. So I think even while I was growing up, it was always a struggle for me to, always, I wondered whether I completely belong to this place or not. And it's a question which always used to plague me. And I think it was very cathartic, collecting these stories, talking to these people, and writing this book, because it really did bring me close to the place and the people. And collecting stories like the ones you mentioned, like Visa, for example. She's married to somebody who is, most of her, she's almost American, because she's done a lot of her schooling, and
at one point she loses interest in her PhD.
Yeah, studies over there, but she is a Kashmiri, but she marries somebody who is from Hyderabad in India, but also born brought up in America. So when you marry somebody who doesn't completely understand where you're coming from, and especially a place like Kashmir, where which has layers and layers of.
But isn't also the Kashmir story being transported, for example, to these people who are not Kashmiris,
Yeah.
but they are somehow in a relationship or get married or engaged to Kashmiris, either way, and because they see this is something new for them. Like,
Yeah, and there's
there is
no
no
need for
communication for 6 months, there is no internet, there is no mobile phones ringing, there is no fixed line working,
Yeah.
and then there is this letter writing happening. So this also in some ways transports the Kashmir story to other
Other people, yeah.
other people.
For sure. I think there is a certain unlearning which comes with being in a relationship with somebody from Kashmir, and you see that in a few of these stories, really, especially this one with the visa, where she gets married to this guy and she's in Kashmir and she has to go back to the US, but her visa application gets flagged for a year. So for a year after her marriage, she actually doesn't see her husband, and then they have to resort to, and this is like 2008, 2009. So back then, even the broadband internet wasn't, the best. They didn't have video calling or anything. So how did they sustain this relationship over the internet for a year? And it was an arranged marriage. And how do you also, and this is during 2008 or 9. So there is
You witnessed 2008 in Kashmir yourself.
Yeah, I did.
2010 protests
Yeah,
also.
yeah,
2016 also.
16, no, 16 I was in college.
2019.
Yeah, 2019 I
A
was.
bit of it.
I mean, I wasn't in Kashmir, but I was on the outside wondering what's happening and trying to get in touch with my father who was over here. So, going back to her story, I think for a person who has not experienced any of it, how do you explain that to them? And you just married them and they don't understand anything about Kashmir, and then you're trying to explain that, and then you have all the other facets of a new relationship which you have to build with not much communication or not many tools at your disposal. So what does that really do to your relationship? So I think you see that time and again through the book.
Sometimes there is understanding from the other side,
and sometimes
other times it can
not.
act as a barrier.
Yeah.
For example, you quote I think I'll quote this line where you say that how much they yearned for the scent of their homeland. It was in relation to Bushra.
Yeah.
When she actually comes to this part of Kashmir because of her love for her husband, Burhan, who lives in North Kashmir. And then when she sees that she has actually been tricked into something which she did not believe, but she had placed her faith and trust in this man. And then the kids also at one point in time decide to go with the father. And then she starts missing her homeland on the other side of Kashmir. And there are these heartbreaking stories as well. And at the end of some stories, you also mentioned that now this and this guy got married or they are now separated. So, sort of there's closure.
Update.
Yeah, there's an update on these stories. So one more point was about this negotiation with loss, for example, negotiation with loss, and also the fragrance of these letters. I'm reminded of one of the stories, I think titled Ambulance, where Dr. Gowhar and Dr. Ikra, I think, both doctors, different departments, and then they find a novel way of handing over these letters in envelopes to these ambulance drivers, sometimes to a staff member. And then it would take 4 or 5 days, to find out where Dr. Gowhar is.
Yeah.
And this is a very dramatic scene where you actually, when there is some ease in communication, and this Dr. Ikra visits the hospital and goes to a certain places in the hospital where she thinks Dr. Gowhar might be.
Yeah.
So yeah, tell us more about this story and how it felt like first listening to it and then narrating the story.
So this story is one of the few in which I have had the pleasure to speak to both sides of the party. Because a lot of times I would speak to one person who's narrating their story to me and not really to
the other side is not available for some reason.
So with them, I spoke to both Gowhar and Ikra. And like I mentioned, the book is divided into 3. And this is the first story from the last section of the book, which is ours.
As is today.
And it is... it's basically the section which deals with the abrogation of Article 370. And I thought that story was the perfect one to really, take you into that world about what was really happening at that time and what was happening to Kashmir and to Kashmiris. And it's very interesting that both doctors, so, they're supposed to go on duty because, there are still people who are ailing.
Yeah.
But then Gowhar is in general medicine, and he's an SMHS, and Kira is a psychiatry, which is not seen as an emergency branch. So she doesn't have duty as much. So they have a lot of permutation combinations happening in terms of whether they'll be able to see each other or not. And even though the hospitals are governed by the same medical college, which is GMC, so they have the same ambulance chain, which takes the doctors from the home, takes them to the hospital, and takes them back. Because at that time, even civilian vehicles were not allowed. So doctors were taken in ambulances. So, that's another.
Mehak, would you like to read a small passage, small paragraph from your favorite paragraph from your book? Yeah, you can think about it, and I'll keep explaining to the audiences that this Loal is a Kashmiri word for love, longing, or affection. And we also have another word equivalent of this is my in Kashmiri, or in Urdu, for example, muhabbat, ishq, or Persian you have. So these stories, 16 stories that Mehak is narrating, are divided into 3 parts. So yeah, please, if you're ready with your.
So yeah, this is a paragraph which I feel like everybody, I don't know, they pick it up from the book and they keep asking me whether I have written it, but I haven't. The person who narrated the story, she told me, she said these exact words, and that's what I've written. And I think they really encapsulate what the book is about.
Okay.
So, and her, serendipitously, her name is Mehak as well.
Yeah, fragrance.
Yes. So, Mehak wished to tell everyone who messaged her this: we cannot control death. That is inevitable. But what is within our reach is love. Loving the people we can and showing our love to them. When we aren't given the freedom to profess our love, it is the worst kind of cruelty, a crime against a people. Love is humanity. It is everything, existing beyond borders, beyond language. We have seen curfews and lockdowns, and each of them leads to a curfew on love. Love gets caged. A lock is put on it. And yet, here's the miracle. Despite the obstacles that do exist, people continue to love. They don't forget each other.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So, Mehak, before concluding, I would like to also ask that in some of the stories, there's a lot of resilience. I think in fact, most stories, people also break, and there is also heartbreak, but there is also a lot of resilience. Have you tried to probe this resilience enough? Or, for example, went deeper into the subject that what is this, where does this resilience come from in Kashmir, especially people who face this, for somebody from outside, having curfew for 6 months or having shutdowns for prolonged shutdowns or no internet, this will be an abnormal situation. But whatever the world considers abnormal is like sort of normal for many people in Kashmir in the last 35 years or so. So my question is, have you tried to probe this resilience further?
Further than what's in the
what you have already covered and captured.
Beyond the stories, it is something that I continue to do in my work because I am a filmmaker, and I think there are a lot of things which you can tell much better in fiction. And I love writing fiction as a filmmaker, and that's something I want to explore through my fiction.
Some of the names you have fictionalized.
I have fictionalized the names, but the stories are all true, and as they have been told, even sometimes the names of places, for example. And when you talk about resilience in Kashmir, I don't think it's something that you have a choice to have or not to have. I think it comes organically because you are put into circumstances where you have to find ways to
survive,
to
hope.
Hope, to deal with things. And like going back to ambulance, the
Gowhar and
Ikra's ambulance, that chapter in which psychiatry is not seen as an emergency branch, whereas she says that most
actually
of the
people get affected because of the situation. There is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. There are anxiety, stress.
Yeah, and in a place like Kashmir where there's so much PTSD and undiagnosed, to say that psychiatry is not an emergency branch.
In fact, one of the studies conducted by MSF in collaboration with IMHANS, Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, said that 44% of the adult population in Kashmir suffers from one or the other kind of anxiety, stress, and PTSD. So in that way, like psychiatry should be seen very, taken very seriously.
But it's not, and
What
but that
Pagal
hospital was
Khana,
called
yeah.
Pagal Khana. So why does that happen? At what point do you move past that? And yeah, so I think this resilience is there's an urgency in a lot of these people in these stories to um, reach out to the ones they love. But I think it comes from living in a place like Kashmir where things can get volatile very quickly. And so you kind of look for a person in your life who is a constant or who understands you or understands what's happening around you. So when you have stories like, for example, Zara in Visa,
Yeah.
where that person does, when your partner doesn't exactly understand what's happening, so that can be extremely jarring. So how do you bridge that gap as well? So I think the stories kind of cover a lot of different aspects. I don't think for me the book is it's complete, but I feel like there's so many more stories which are
So we do
need to
like,
be
can
told.
we hope for another edition? Do you want to take it forward, and we will have part two probably of this book, or in some other form?
In some other form, maybe. I am not immediately. I haven't thought about a sequel
You're
immediately
still
for this.
processing
Yeah, for
a lot of
sure.
reviews.
Yeah, and I just I want to tell more stories from Kashmir, and that's all. That's what I've always
There's
wanted.
another book, short story, which was also released this year
Right,
by
right.
Zahid Rafiq.
Yeah.
The world has its mouth wide
World
open.
with its wide
Yeah.
mouth wide open.
Yes.
Yeah.
So like, it's also like from the 90s we have seen this trend of
Mm.
Kashmiris telling their own stories,
Yeah.
especially in the English language, and trying to connect to the wider world. And otherwise there have been a lot of storytelling in Kashmiri language or Urdu language, but this is something I think which started from Agha Shahid Ali,
Yeah.
after this Kashmiri American poet.
Yeah.
So we wish you all the best in your endeavors, and hope to see more books from you.
Thank you so
And
much.
for our audiences, we would tell them that please get this book and try to read it. Yeah, and some of the stories are really, really very powerful. So thank you for speaking to the front
Thank
line.
you so
Thank you
much.
very much.
Thank you so much, and it was lovely talking to you.